Have you ever seen someone walk into a room and instantly make people feel comfortable around them? It doesn't look forced. It doesn't look rehearsed. It almost feels effortless. But it isn't magic. It's a skill. And that skill begins with something most people completely overlook: real curiosity. The foundation of meaningful conversation isn't confidence. It isn't charisma. It isn't having the perfect thing to say. It's being genuinely interested in the person in front of you. Because when your curiosity is real, everything changes. Your body language softens. Your questions become better. Your anxiety fades because you stop trying to perform. That's the truth most people miss. Conversation isn't about performance, it's about discovery. So many people walk into conversations believing they need to sound impressive. They think they need to be witty, interesting, memorable. But the people who leave the deepest impact usually aren't the ones speaking the most brilliantly. They're the ones listening the most carefully. They approach people the way someone approaches a book they actually want to read, not a pause between chances to talk about themselves. So instead of asking, "What do you do?" try asking, "What's been keeping you busy lately that you're genuinely excited about?" Notice the difference. The first question asks for a label. The second invites a story. It opens the door to enthusiasm, meaning, and personality. And when someone begins to answer, lean in a little, hold warm eye contact. Ask a follow-up that goes deeper into the part that seems to matter most to them. That one shift from self-focus to sincere curiosity can completely change how people respond to you. Because when someone feels truly interesting in your presence, they remember that feeling long after they forget your exact words. We've all been stuck in conversations with someone who's clearly just waiting for their turn to speak. So when someone actually listens, really listens, it stands out immediately. Here's the truth worth remembering. Charisma isn't about being impressive. It's about making people feel important. The moment your attention shifts from "how am I coming across" to "what can I discover about this person?" everything changes. It's strange, isn't it? We'll spend ages reading restaurant reviews online, comparing menus and ratings. But we won't spend 30 seconds being genuinely curious about the human being sitting right in front of us. We'll think harder about, "How's the food here?" than, "How are you really doing?" Chapter 1. First Impressions. The 3-second rule. There's a tiny window at the beginning of every interaction that shapes everything that follows. It lasts about 3 seconds. Miss it, and the conversation starts uphill. Use it well, and the rest of the interaction becomes much easier. Those first few seconds create the emotional tone of the exchange, and in that moment, people aren't analysing your words. They're reading your energy. That's why the real priority at the beginning of a conversation isn't content, it's presence. Presence before words, connection before conversation. Here's what that looks like. Before you speak, take one full breath. Make intentional eye contact. Offer a genuine smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. That sequence sends a quiet message to the other person's nervous system. "I see you. I'm here with you. You matter right now." When you meet someone, don't rush straight into, "Hey, I'm..." Pause. Breathe. Connect with your eyes. Smile. Then speak. It's subtle, but it changes everything. Because before a single word is exchanged, you've already created an emotional impression. In group settings, this matters even more. Before focusing on one person, acknowledge the room with your eyes. Let people feel included in your awareness. That small habit changes how a group receives you. Those 3 seconds may seem minor, but they shape the rest of the conversation. They create safety. They make the other person feel noticed rather than processed. And that alone separates you from the huge number of people who move through introductions on autopilot. We all know the difference between being truly seen and simply being handled. There's something powerful about the moment someone looks at you as if you actually matter, as if you're not just the next face in line. Remember this: the quality of your attention shapes the quality of your connection. 3 seconds of real presence can do more than 3 minutes of distracted conversation. In a way, people aren't that different from dogs. Look at a dog with real excitement and it lights up instantly. Human beings are surprisingly similar. Most of us are just waiting for someone to be genuinely glad we're there, without checking their phone halfway through our sentence. Chapter 2. The Art of the Meaningful Pause. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. The moment a gap appears in conversation, they rush to fill it. But people who are truly skilled at communication often do the opposite. They know that silence, used well, is powerful, because silence creates space. And in that space, something important happens. People reveal more, your responses become more thoughtful, and the conversation gains emotional depth. The key is understanding the difference between awkward silence and intentional pause. Awkward silence comes from fear. Meaningful pause comes from confidence. When you learn to pause on purpose, the entire energy of a conversation changes. For example, after you ask someone an important question, don't jump in the second they finish answering. Let a few seconds pass. Count to 3 in your head if you need to. That pause does 2 things. It gives them room to continue if they want to, and it shows you're actually absorbing what they said. The same is true when someone shares something personal or emotionally significant. Don't rush to fill the space with advice, your own story, or the next question. Sometimes a quiet nod and a few seconds of silence communicate more respect than words ever could. That kind of pause tells them, what you just said matters enough for me to sit with it. And people feel that. They feel heard more deeply because you're giving their words room to land. In a world full of interruption, noise, and half attention, the ability to create calm space in conversation is rare. And because it's rare, it's valuable. Here's the paradox. The less afraid you are of silence, the more people will want to talk to you. Why? Because rushing to fill every gap often signals nervousness. Comfortable silence signals steadiness. We've reached a point where even 2 seconds of silence can feel unbearable. Our ancestors could sit around a fire for hours in peaceful quiet. We get anxious when the typing bubble disappears. Chapter 3. Beyond small talk. Questions that create depth. There's a kind of question that can instantly shift a conversation from shallow to meaningful. Most people never learn how to ask it. The best questions don't ask for facts. They invite stories. They don't just collect information. They create room for emotion, meaning, and reflection. The simplest way to think about it is this. Ask about experience, change, and feeling. Not just status, labels, or data. Instead of asking, what do? Try, what part of your work has felt most energizing lately? Instead of, have you been here before? Try, what's your connection to this place? Questions like these bypass social autopilot. They invite the real person into the room. A useful rule: questions that begin with what or how usually create more space than questions that begin with do, is, or have. Closed questions often lead to short answers. Open questions invite a conversation. For example, instead of asking, where are you from? You could ask, what's something about the place you grew up that shaped who you are? Or instead of, any plans this weekend? You might ask, what are you looking forward to most right now? Notice what changes. Those questions don't just ask for updates. They invite reflection. And that changes how people experience you. You become someone who looks beneath the surface. Someone who creates space for honesty instead of just exchanging predictable scripts. We've all had those conversations that go, how are you? Good. You? Good. And then nothing. So when someone asks a question that actually makes room for a real answer, it feels like relief. Remember this. People don't connect because your questions are perfect. They connect because your questions make room for real humanity. Your question isn't the point, it's the doorway. Chapter 4. Reading the Room, the Hidden Language Beneath Words. Every conversation contains two layers. There's the part being spoken out loud, and then there's the part happening underneath it. That second layer, the emotional undercurrent, the body language, the energy in the room, is what most people completely miss. But it often tells you more than the words themselves. Reading the room isn't mysterious. It's a skill of attention. It means learning to track 3 things at once. 1. Body language. Notice posture, eye contact, facial expressions, and shifts in physical energy. 2. Emotional tone. Listen for changes in pace, pitch, softness, sharpness, or hesitation. 3. Conversational energy. Pay attention to whether the person is leaning in, giving fuller answers, asking you questions back, or withdrawing. The most important insight here is this. When someone's words and their nonverbal signals don't match, trust the nonverbal. If someone says, "That's interesting," while leaning back, crossing their arms and tightening their expression, there's a good chance they're not actually comfortable. And if you ignore that mismatch, the conversation starts drifting away from reality. Instead, you can gently acknowledge it. I get the sense there might be more to that. What's coming up for you? That kind of response makes room for honesty. On the other hand, if you notice someone's face light up for a split second when a certain topic comes up, that's a clue too. Follow it. That spark often means you've touched something meaningful. Learning to notice these signals changes everything. It helps you know when to go deeper, when to slow down, when to shift direction, and when someone needs support rather than another question. Most of us have had the experience of sensing that something was off in a conversation even though we couldn't explain why. That isn't random. Your brain is picking up far more than you realize. The truth is, some of the most important parts of a conversation are never spoken directly. Learn to listen with your eyes, and you'll start hearing what most people miss. It's funny how we'll analyze a single text message for hours, wondering whether a period means someone is upset, and then sit face to face with a person sending us dozens of signals through their body, tone, and expression, and miss all of them. Chapter 5. The Conversational Boomerang. Always knowing what to say. Next. A lot of people worry about running out of things to say. They panic in the middle of a conversation because they think they need to come up with the perfect next line. But there's a simple method that solves that problem almost every time. Think of it as the conversational boomerang. Receive, reflect, return. When someone shares something with you, receive it fully. Reflect back the part that seems most important. Return with a related question or insight that keeps the conversation moving. The reflection step is where the magic happens. You don't just repeat what they said word for word. You highlight the part that feels emotionally or meaningfully important. For example, if someone says, "Work has been a lot lately with all these new projects," you might respond, "Sounds like the new projects have really changed the pace for you. What's been the most unexpected part of that?" See what happened there? You picked up the key element, new projects, reflected it back, and then used it to move deeper. That does 3 things at once. It proves you are listening, it validates their experience, and it gives the conversation natural momentum. The same principle works anywhere. It sounds like that trip gave you exactly the reset you needed. What part of it has stayed with you the most since you got back? This is how you stop feeling like you have to invent the next thing to say. You don't need better lines, you need better attention. Because the material for the next great question is usually already inside the last thing they said. That's the real secret. You never run out of things to say when you learn how to listen for what matters. Most people are practically handing you the next direction of the conversation. You just have to catch it. Chapter 6. Navigating difficult conversations with grace. The conversations we avoid the most are often the ones that matter the most. And the key to handling them well is simple, but not easy. Stop trying to win. Start trying to understand. Difficult conversations become much more productive when your goal shifts from proving a point to building clarity. One helpful framework is this: build the bridge before you touch the barrier. Before addressing the problem, create a sense of safety. Start with common ground. Name the shared value, shared goal, or shared care underneath the issue. Then speak from your own experience rather than making accusations. Use I statements instead of you attacks. Ask questions that invite perspective instead of forcing defense. And most importantly, show that you understand their point of view before trying to make yours understood. For example, instead of saying, "You're always late, it's disrespectful," try something like, "I really value the time we spend together, and I've noticed we've been starting later than planned a lot lately. When that happens, I feel stressed and thrown off. I'd love to understand how you're seeing it." Notice the difference. The first version triggers defensiveness. The second opens a door. It communicates, "We're on the same side, this matters to me, and I want to understand before I judge." That's what makes hard conversations safer. And when people feel safer, they're more honest. Mastering difficult conversations doesn't just solve problems. It builds trust. It shows people that conflict with you doesn't automatically mean attack, blame, or emotional chaos. It means there's room for truth, respect, and repair. And in a world where hard conversations are either avoided or turned into battles, that skill is incredibly valuable. One of the most powerful phrases you can use is, "Help me understand." Not as a weapon, not as sarcasm, as a sincere invitation. Because those 3 words create space where defensiveness usually creates walls. Chapter 7. Digital communication, creating connection. Without the room. Digital communication isn't just in-person conversation through a screen. It's its own language. And because so much of human meaning normally comes through facial expression, tone, body language, and timing, digital communication requires more intention. When those cues disappear, misunderstandings multiply. So if you want connection to survive through text, email, or video calls, you have to become more deliberate. The main principle is this: what would normally be implied in person often needs to be made explicit online. That means being clearer about your tone, giving more context, checking for understanding more often, and choosing the right medium for the message. For example, sending a text that says, "We need to talk about the project," can create unnecessary anxiety. A better version might be, "I've got a few thoughts about the project timeline and would love to talk them through. Nothing urgent. Would you have 15 minutes tomorrow?" Same topic, completely different emotional impact. That extra clarity matters. Video calls also benefit from intentional check-ins. Before diving into the task, ask something like, "How's your energy today? How's your week been going? What kind of headspace are you in right now?" In person, you might sense those things immediately. Online, you usually won't, unless you ask. These small questions recreate some of the human context that screens tend to strip away. And the more of our lives move into digital spaces, the more valuable this becomes. Because good digital communication isn't just about clarity, it's about preserving humanity. We've all had messages misread. We've all sent something harmless that landed the wrong way because tone got lost. The solution isn't perfection. It's being more intentional than the medium naturally encourages you to be. Digital conversation doesn't have to feel cold, but it does require you to be more explicit about context, tone, and intention than you would face to face.